mathematics STRAND project for Emily Dodge and Scout Bullard.
So for our project, we chose second grade, and this project focuses on teaching second grade students how to compose wholes from fractional parts. Really, they're just dealing with breaking up whole fractions and knowing how to put them back together and how each part makes up a whole. For the state standard, we used number sentences, I think. The student will use mathematic reasoning and justification to solve contextual problems that involve partitioning models into equal-sized parts with halves, fourths, eighths, thirds, and sixths, and they will compose the whole for a given fractional part and its given value in context for the same fractions. And then our Common Core standard is they will understand numbers, ways of representing numbers, and relationships among numbers and number systems, understanding and representing commonly used fractions such as fourth, third, and half.
So for unpacking standards, this is just what comes from the SOL website. I'm not going to go into it because it's a lot. But then there's the concept map of just showing that they're composing the whole of each of those different given fractions. And then for unpacking standard, it's the same standard, obviously. And then the students will need to compose the whole for the given fractions. The level of Bloom's taxonomy was analyzed because the students are breaking down what they know about fractional parts to understand how they make the whole. And then what they would need to know in order to do that is understanding fractions and recognizing equal parts and knowing the different unit fractions that are required for the SOL and understanding the part to whole relationship. And then the objective for that would be given multiple fractions, students will compose the whole for the given fraction and its value for halves, fourths, eighths, thirds, and sixths with 85% accuracy by teacher-made tests. And then the assessment is just using visual shading models of fractions. They would identify them, label them, and then compose the whole for that fraction. Essential questions are: how can we apply equal parts to understand and solve real-world problems? How do fractional parts help us understand and represent equal shares from a whole? And how could you figure out how many parts are needed to make a fractional whole?
For the note-taking device, students will create a fraction pizza, which is just a foldable model that is used to visually represent different fraction parts, and they can manipulate it during instruction time, and they can also refer back to it if they need extra practice. So basically, this picture down here is an example taken from an online blog by a teacher. Students will get a circle, and then they'll have to mark the partitions in the fractions and then fold them, and then they can cut them out if they want so that they can manipulate them to form the different wholes. And then they will be able to keep it just stored in a plastic bag with their math folder, and then they'll be able to come back to it later on. For the text set, the 3 books we picked were the Hershey's Milk Chocolate Bar Fractions book by Jerry Paletta, A Fractions Goal, Parts of a Whole by Brian P. Cleary, and Fractions Equal Trouble by Claudia Mills. All of these are a bit higher on the Lexile rating, so they would each be used as a read aloud, and one of them is used in our lesson plan. But basically, each one, so the Hershey's Milk Chocolate Bar Fractions book it just uses the chocolate bar to show how wholes can be divided into parts. A Fractions Goal, Parts of a Whole is a story, and so is Fractions Equal Trouble. So they both have characters and just reinforce the same concepts of learning fractions and being able to understand them.
So for our lesson plan, we did the students will use paper cutout shapes and partition them into equal parts with the fractions that are in the SOL and use mathematical reasoning to determine how many more parts are needed to make the whole with 85% accuracy. So for the set, you just ask the students, have you ever tried to share like a cookie or a pizza or something like that with someone? And how did they make sure everyone got an equal share? And then show them images of a cookie split up into different parts of equal shares. For direct instruction, the teacher will use a large paper circle and just fold and cut it into the equal parts and ask the student for each fraction how many parts of it make a whole. So if it's halves, it would be 2. And then if you only had 1/2, how many more do you need to make a whole? And you just repeat that for all the different fractions in the SOL. And then students will fill out a vocabulary sheet just of all of the words to remind them of what they mean, and they can have it to reference back to. For guided practice, the teacher will read the Hershey bar book and give each student Hershey bars that they can cut into different parts. So while the teacher reads, she'll instruct them to cut the different fractions as they read along, and then she'll ask them questions afterwards. For independent practice, there's 3 different rotations that all have different worksheets on them. So one's coloring different fractions, the other one is fill in the whole. So they'll fill in the other part that's not shaded and identify how many more it would be to make the whole. And then the last station, the students do story problems. So the example I was given is, if I eat 2/3 of my sandwich, how much more do I have to eat the whole thing? And they'll just write their answer for that. The closure is an exit ticket, and they will just write about what they learned and then draw a shape and divide it into 4 equal parts. We don't really need to go over that because we'll go over it later in the rest of it. The big idea was, today I will compose the whole for the given fraction so that I can provide equal shares and fairness to others in life. I know you've got it when you can properly use fractional pieces to identify how many more are needed to make a whole and explain how you did it with words or drawings.
For the integrated activities, for the science one, we chose to do a life science standard, or a life cycle standard, and basically the students will make a fraction-based model for the life cycle. So like for a butterfly, they'll separate it into fourths. They'll have to label each fraction part of it and be able to answer questions like, if a butterfly's in the caterpillar stage, what fraction of the life cycle is it in? Stuff like that. The social science one is for map skills. And for this one, they'll be creating their own map for a fictional city, one they want to make up. And they'll, again, divide it into fractions and for different portions of their map. So it could be neighborhood, it could be hospitals, shops, anything like that, and be able to say, like 3/8 of my city is houses, or they can separate it into fourths and say 1/4 of my city is a park. For the math tiered activities, we have the 3 levels below. This will be, they'll be manipulating Play-Doh. So they'll get a ball of Play-Doh and they'll work with the teacher, rolling it out and dividing it into different fractions, and being able to take them apart and put them back together, knowing how much of each fraction it takes to make a whole. The on-grade level, these are for students who are keeping up with the instruction. The group will work with paper fraction strips. They'll mark and cut up their fractions and be able to mix and match different strips to build a whole with their fraction pieces. And then their above grade level, this group works with puzzles, so it's just a bit more complicated than the fraction pieces. They'll work with puzzles and they'll be able to swap pieces to see what they can use to create wholes. So this can go a little bit further with, like, instead of 2 halves, you can use a half, and maybe 2/4 will equal the other half, and just understand that they can go even bigger than a whole when making fractions.
For the assessments, a formative assessment, you could use for this would be an ice cream sundae like matching activity. So the first part of the worksheet, they're identifying how many scoops are in the sundae, and then that would be the bottom number. The top number is how many scoops are mint ice cream. And then the second part is just cutouts that they can do with a partner to match the correct ones together. The next formative assessment is another worksheet that's just a fractional matching game. This one would be a little more complex, but it could be used to introduce more fractions and topics. It could be adjusted with different fractions. But this is just an example, and they would just match the equivalent fractions in groups. And then for summative assessment, they will be given multiple different shapes and just have to divide them into equal parts. And then they will explain how they did that and how each of them are equal, and then write about how many parts are needed to make the fraction whole.
And then those are our references.